Erev Tov. More than anything else, a rabbi is a teacher. And in fact, that's what the word Rav or Rabbi means. Think in terms of the degrees that we're familiar with, a master's degree, right? It's a higher level of learning. And that's exactly what Rav means, a master. He's mastered the material and he is turned to for information. So it's for 40 plus years, to me, the most important thing that I've ever done as rabbi is to be a teacher. And I'm thinking back over 40 years of courses. I don't remember if in the very beginning I started with a Wednesday night course at 7:30, but quickly that became our custom. And in thinking about it, I know that in each and every year there was usually 2, maybe sometimes 3 different courses that I offered. So in the course of 40 plus years, there were probably 100 different classes that we offered and that we learned together. A lot of them were biblical books. For sure, we studied Genesis and Exodus. We then went to Judges, the books of Samuel, books of Kings. We studied a number of the prophets, selections from the Psalms. We did the book of Proverbs. We did the book of Job once. Certainly the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls. And not too long ago, we studied the book of Daniel as well. In addition to the Bible courses, there were a number of Talmud courses. Specifically, we studied in Gittin, the Masechet in the Torah, in the Talmud that deals with the destruction of the temple. And we also, a couple of years ago, we did the stories of the fantastic stories of Rabba Bar Chana. And we've studied selections from Barachot, the first and most basic of the Talmudic passages. We've studied Midrash, how the rabbis interpreted the stories about the stories. We've also had a couple of times Ask the Rabbi, including until a couple of weeks ago. We've also done, the beginning of last year and this year, Parshat HaShavua, looking at the weekly Torah portions. We've also studied together popular Israeli songs, Jewish law, halacha. You may remember when there was the great interest and controversy about homosexuality in Judaism. We dealt with the tshuvot, the responsa of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. We had a course where if you were Pope, and we talked about things we might change about Jewish tradition. We had a course on belief systems and what it is, the basic beliefs, and does Judaism really expect us to believe certain dogmas? And we talked about that. We did the poetry of Yehuda Amichai, the most important of the contemporary Israeli poets. We studied Pirkei Avot at the beginning of this year. We've had a number of courses about prayer. We looked at leadership during the Holocaust and how different Jews in different circumstances responded. And you may recall at different times we studied epic Hebrew poems, one by Bialik, one by Yitzchak Katzenelson about the Holocaust, and one by Yud Lamed Gordon. So those are just some of the courses, and I guess there's probably about 100 all told that we have studied together. I'm thinking about the format of our studying, and we had sometimes 10 people, sometimes as many as 30 people who joined us. Interestingly, we had questions. Sometimes we had speeches, people who raised their hand and just gave a speech and had to unburden themselves about their feelings. Sometimes it was not so much questions as it was challenges. And I know some people might have thought that person is being disrespectful to the rabbi. But when the opposite is true, that I felt that by the challenges, Rabbi, really? That's what we believe? That's craziness. How can you say such a thing? By being challenged, it forced me and it forced all of us to take things that, instead of just accepting them, to rethink them. And that's always an important thing in the process of learning and studying. You will know that with only a few exceptions, most of the time, the courses that I taught were text-based. In other words, we start with a book or with a text. It could be the Bible or the Talmud or the Midrash, or it could be even a poem, even a secular Jewish or Israeli poem. But we deal with a text. That's the way that I was trained to be a rabbi. It's all about text study. There are other ways of doing things. You know, there could be lectures on topics, but the way I was taught and the way that I prefer is this notion of we study a text. Now, when you do that, what's interesting is that there are two very different approaches. And to me, it's critical that they both have to be brought together. And those two approaches are called pshat and drash. Pshat literally means the simple meaning of the text. What did the author intend when he wrote this text to the people that he was writing for? But then you have a second level, which is called drash. Same word as midrash, which means to search, to delve, to dig. And the idea is that the rabbis in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century and onward took texts, usually biblical texts, and they often turned the meaning, what was intended by the original author, and delved and dug and searched and found contemporary and creative meanings in these texts. And that's the great beauty as well as the great strength of Jewish learning. We start with a text, a classic text that unites us all, but then each of us tries to find our own meaning in it. So we're united by the text that we study together, but then we have the freedom to go in our own different ways with the text. That's the enormity, the beauty, the brilliance of traditional Jewish learning. There's an incredible teaching in the Talmud, in Ta'anit, and it says it's from Rabbi Hanina. And Rabbi Hanina says the following: I have learned much from my teachers, even more from my friends and fellow students and colleagues. But from my students, I have learned more than from all of them. And that's one of the great secrets about teaching, that our students end up being our teachers by the fresh way that they approach a text. After we've read something over and over and over again, especially with traditional commentaries, we generally see it in a very narrow way. But a student comes to it new and naive and fresh, and often their reading and their insights enables us to open our eyes and see things that either we never saw or maybe we once saw but we've forgotten. So I have to pay tribute to all those people who sat before me in the sanctuary and who were my students, because from my students I learned. And especially when students not just ask questions, forcing me to come up with a good answer, but also when they challenge me, right? As I've said, sometimes we're too pious with our texts. And ultimately, by being challenged, you have to stop and you have to reconsider. So that's our little introduction tonight. What I wanted to do on this last class of my career as the rabbi of Temple Beth Torah is to teach the Hadran. What is a Hadran? So if you look at the end of a Talmudic passage, what do we got? We've got the end of the Masechet. And at the very end of the Talmud book, there's a long prayer that's called the Hadran. And it's traditional that when people finish the study of a book, or every 7.5 years for Daf Yomi, if you studied the entire Talmud, it's traditional to have a ceremony and a prayer at that ceremony called a Hadran. So let's look at that word for a minute, because that too is interesting. The word Hadran, okay, there are two possible meanings to this word. If this is a Hebrew word, the word Hadar in Hebrew means glory or beauty. And the prayer, which starts out with the word Hadran, basically is the teacher and the students talking to the book that they just finished. This is an incredible idea. The teacher and the student are addressing the book. And they start with this script, the Hadran. And we start by saying, Hadran alach. Right? Now, if this is a Hebrew word, then what we're telling the book is your glory and your beauty is now ours. Because we studied you, we learned you, we've taken this from you, right? Whatever brilliance, wisdom, and beauty and insights the book had, they're now ours because we've studied the book. So we're basically saying to the book, thank you. Your brilliance, your wisdom, your beauty is now part of us, okay? But I got to tell you, Jews spoke 2 languages 2,000 years ago. Not only Hebrew, but Aramaic. Aramaic is written in Hebrew letters. Many of the words look like they're Hebrew, but it's not quite, okay? So maybe it's like the difference between Italian and Spanish, right? You might be able to make your way through one language if you knew the other one. But it's not always so easy. That's the story with Hebrew and Aramaic. And of course, the most famous Aramaic that we all know is the Kaddish. The Mourner's Kaddish especially, but all of the Kaddishes. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah is not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. It's written in Hebrew letters, and the words seem like words that we know. Yitgadal from gadol, to be great. V'yitkadash from kodesh, holy. Shemei, same word as shame, name. Rabbah, Rav, great, right? May your name be sanctified and glorified forever. So if the word Hadran is actually an Aramaic word, not a Hebrew word. In Aramaic, the word hadar means we will return. So in other words, in Aramaic, when you say at the end of studying the book, and you say to the book, Hadran Allah, right? What we're basically saying is the idea that this book meant so much to us, we will return to it. But we're talking to the book. Don't feel bad. You know, there are 63 tractates in the Talmud. You go through one, and then you're going to go through another. And again, people who study the Talmud one after another, a page a day in Daf Yomi, it's going to take them 7.5 years until they start over again. So I've studied this book, I finished it, I'm moving on to the next book, and I say to this book, we'll be back to you. It may take us a little while, right? It may be 7.5 years, but we're coming back. Hadran Allah. We will return to you. Don't feel bad. Don't get upset. Don't feel lonely. You're always in our minds and in our hearts, and we'll be back. I shall return, kind of thing. Okay? So the other thing I need to tell you is that when people finish a book of the Talmud, they do what's called, they make a party. And the party is called a Siyum. Siyum means to complete. And the idea is 3 things happen at a Siyum. You finish the final page. That's number 1. Number 2, often the teacher will get up and he will make some kind of sermon about the idea on that last page, or maybe about the whole book. And sometimes he will tie this topic in the book to an earlier topic in the book. So you finish the book, the rabbi makes a sermon about the content of the book, and then there's a celebration. When Jews celebrate, you need schnapps or wine, and you need meat. So here's the interesting thing. The celebration of studying and completing a book takes precedence over the obligation to fast, for instance. So, as an example, the eve of Passover, you may be aware that there's a tradition called Siyum Bechorim, the conclusion, the completion for the firstborn. Technically, all firstborn Jews are supposed to fast the morning of the Passover Seder, that whole day, until the Seder. Why? Because it was on that day that the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed. So as a way of showing our gratitude, we fast out of reverence for the lives that were lost and thanksgiving for what was done for us. But the tradition became, it's not so easy to fast Erev Pesach. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So the tradition came that firstborns, instead of fasting Erev Pesach, are allowed to go to shul that morning, and the rabbi will usually study or complete something, and then because they completed the book, they need to have the celebration. Well, I've got these 2 values. Which one overtakes the other? On the one hand, I got to celebrate the conclusion of a book. On the other hand, I'm supposed to fast. Well, the idea was the celebration takes priority over the other one. So we have this prayer they called the Hadran that was recited. So listen to the first paragraph. This is how it goes. We will return to you, Masechet, and then you're talking to the book. So you say the name of the book. If the name of the book that we studied was Brachot or Gitin, we will return to you, Masechet Brachot, right? And you will return to us. Very beautiful idea. Our thoughts are about you, Masechet Brachot, and your thoughts are about us. Think about that. That's incredible that we're making the book a living being. So not only are we saying to the book, you're beautiful, we thank you, we learned a lot from you, that's one thing. But we will never forget you. Okay, that's impressive. But you will not forget us. So the book, right, has a mind. The book has a memory. The book will remember the students who were there and who studied it. And we know, just like we won't forget you, you won't forget having taught us. Amazing, we're talking to the book. Then it goes on, not in this world and not in the world to come. And the tradition is that this is recited 3 times, just like Kol Nidre, we recite 3 times. This is almost becomes a formula, almost a magic formula. So in Aramaic, it sounds a little bit like this. Hadran alach masechet brachot v'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach masechet brachot v'da'atach ulan. Lo nitneshe minach masechet brachot v'lo titneshi minan. Lo ba'alma hadein v'lo ba'alma da'ate. So that's the formula with which the Hadran begins. Okay? So now we come to the second paragraph of the Hadran. Very interesting. We say the following. Listen to the prayer. May it be your will, God, God of our ancestors, that your Torah be our occupation in this world and remain with us in the world to come. In other words, may we have the time and the inclination to spend our lives studying Torah. And not only that, we look forward to bringing that Torah with us in the world to come, in heaven. What are we going to do? What are Jews going to do in heaven? Not fly around cloud to cloud playing a harp with halos on our head. Jews are going to study in heaven. So we're going to study here. We hope to study in heaven as well. And again, may it be your will, God, that your Torah be our occupation. By occupation, they don't mean a professional occupation, that we occupy ourselves with Torah in this world. Look, there are a lot of people who say, boy, if I only, Tevye, think of Fiddler on the Roof. What did Tevye say? If I were a rich man, I'd have the time that I'd like to sit in the synagogue and pray and discuss the holy books, right? 7 hours every day. Most people aren't rich men, and they've got too many other things. They got to work, they got to make a living, they got to take care of the kids, right? So they don't have the time or the freedom to study. Look, if you become a professional student, either in yeshiva or you dedicate yourself to becoming a rabbi or a teacher, so yes, it's your occupation. But that's not what the prayer is saying. May we be able to occupy our time. So one problem is I may not have the time. The other problem is, people who don't have the intellectual capacity, right? We could certainly imagine, I'm sure this occurs all the time. Somebody said, I would really like to go and study with the rabbi, Wednesday nights, 7:30. So I block out that time and I show up. But then I get there and I don't know what he's talking about, right? I must have missed the introductory course. He's using words that I don't understand. And, that's my bad. That's a bad on the teacher. If you're assuming that everybody knows, they're at this level, and there are people who don't. And I am sure that there are many people who came, all good intentions, but it was beyond them. It was above, what they were capable of doing. And I'm so sorry that, that we weren't able to reach them. But would hope that if you stick with it, eventually you will get it. So listen to how this second paragraph of the Hadran goes on. May it be your will that Torah be our occupation. Now, it says something very strange. It says, Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achdai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Okay, first of all, who's Papa, right? Papa is actually the name of a rabbi from Babylonia, lived in the 4th century, maybe sometime between 300, 375. He was originally Rav Papa, Rabbi Papa. By the way, you may remember from a previous course the difference between Rav and Rabbi. In Babylonia, they called a rabbi Rav. In Israel, Palestine, they called the rabbi Rabbi. Today, all rabbis are Rabbi, but often in Hebrew, the title could be Harav, the Rav, the Reb, the rabbi. Rav Papa was a Babylonian rabbi. He was a student of the two greatest of the Babylonian rabbis, Rava and Abaye. And he then ultimately founded a school, yeshiva, in a small town called Narish. We know that he was very wealthy. He had he was a beer brewer and seller. All right, so he made his money from selling beer and brewing beer, became very wealthy, and then decided that he wanted to open a yeshiva. And he's not one of the greatest of the scholars, not known for his great intellect. He's known more for his wealth. And yet here in the Siyum, in the Hadran, we mention his 10 sons. And again, listen to their names. Some of them sound Hebrew, some of them not so much. Chanina, Rami, Nachman, Achdai, Abba Mari, Rafram, Rachish, Surchav, Ada, and Daru. Mostly sounds like Babylonian names from the 4th century. So what do? We mention in the prayer this particular rabbi and what was originally thought to be his 10 sons. Why are we doing that? What's the point of that? And in fact, I got to tell you that most Talmudic scholars say, actually, we don't even think that these 10 were actually his children. They may have lived at different times in different places, but for whatever reason, this list got put together of 10 so-called sons of Rav Papa. And here's the fascinating thing. Maybe the idea was that he was wealthy, he was rich, and what did he do? When he finished a masechet, when he finished the study of a particular section, he called in his 10 sons and he threw a big party and they all celebrated. So there was this image, and therefore we mention these 10. Now, in looking, this Rav Papa was not the greatest of the scholars, and his sons are not the greatest. So of all the people you could have mentioned Hillel, you could have mentioned Rabbi Akiba. Why are we mentioning Rav Papa and these 10 maybe sons, maybe not sons? And according to the mystics, this became a Segula against forgetting. In other words, by mentioning these 10 sons, with their crazy names, so hard to remember. But if you could say their names over and over again, it would be like a memory aid. It would help your memory. It's almost like a game. If you can remember these 10 guys, then you're sharpening your mind. It's use it or lose it. So use it this way. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. It became a Segula. Now, we got to say a word about Segula. What is a Segula? Segula technically means a treasure, but it was a remedy or a protection, a kind of a charm. Often people went to Hasidic rabbis if they had a disease or if they had a problem in the family. And the rabbi might write out a Segula, an amulet, something that he would write on a piece of paper. It became a charm. Often you would wear it around your neck or keep it in an important place. And my Hasidic Rebbe wrote this, and I know that if I hold on to it and if I repeat the words that he wrote here, this will open the gates of heaven to me and it will help me achieve what I need. So it was felt for 1,000 and longer, 1,500, 1,800 years, it was felt that this second paragraph, repeating the name of the 10 sons of Rav Papa, was a kind of a Segula to help you not forget things. By the way, there are other Segulot. Today, the greatest Segula is against infertility. If a man and woman are married, they've been unable to have a child, they often go to a holy man. Could be a Rebbe, could be a wonder worker, could be some kind of a mystical, Kabbalistic rabbi, and he will write out a Segula, and by reciting it and holding on to that or wearing it, that becomes a charm. And it was believed by many Jews that that charm could help you achieve the thing that you needed most. By the way, one of the most famous Segulot today is the red bendel, the red string that people wear supposedly on the left wrist. And the idea is it was originally just for women who couldn't conceive. What did they do? They went to the tomb of Rachel in Bethlehem. They took a long red cord, tied it around her grave, and then they cut it into small pieces and they wore it. And the fact that Rachel herself, for many years, couldn't conceive and have children. Then eventually she did, of course, Joseph and then Benjamin. And by wearing this red string around her wrist, it was considered a Segula to help you become fertile and to be able to have children. Later, with Kabbalah, and it became a business and a cool thing to do, and so you'll see men and they'll wear it on the right, or not just women wearing it on the left. But the idea became this was originally a Segula. So that's the second paragraph of the Hadran. So now we come to the third paragraph. Listen to the following. It starts with the words Ve'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu. Literally, may the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths. We wouldn't have thought that you talk about Torah, that something to be sweet in your mouth, almost like you're eating it, like it's a candy, like it's a good food. We're asking that God help to make Torah sweet. Now look, I'm sure there are many people who went through Hebrew school and the words of Torah were tortured or they were very bitter. Either they didn't understand them or they didn't agree with them, or it was very troubling what they were reading. Here we're asking that Torah, which is the most important thing that Jews have, we're asking that it becomes sweet, that we understand Torah, even difficult Torah, in such a way that we find the sweetness in it, and that it not be instead something that's very bitter. So may the words be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of all your people, so that we, our children, and all the children of the house of Israel may come to love you, God, and want to study your Torah on its own merit. Okay, so the idea is we're asking God, please make the experience of studying Torah a sweet one and not too difficult. May we all be Yodei Shemecha. May we all come to know God's name. What do you mean, know God's name? I know God's name, Yod He Vav He, Adonai. No, we don't mean to know it, what his name is. We mean to know God. May learning God's Torah help us to understand and become more and become closer and more intimate with God himself. And may we also, God, be lomdei Toratecha lishma. May we come to learn Torah lishma, for its own sake, not for an ulterior motive. It's not so that I can become famous, so that I can win, the Bible quiz. I can become, world renowned. It's not so that I can become a professor or rabbi and make a salary from it. It's so that I could learn Torah for its own sake. Okay? And then another interesting phrase here. Through your commandments, I am wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. Me oivai techak meni mitzvotecha. Throughout the Middle Ages, Jews understood we're never going to be stronger physically than our enemies. The only hope that we have is a Yiddish cup, right? Is to outsmart our enemies. How do you get that smart? Here we're being told by studying Torah. Not only the content of Torah, but the practice of study sharpens the mind and makes you, wise and wiser than your enemies. Not by lo b'chayil, v'lo b'koach. We have the famous passage from the prophet which says, not by might and not by power, but by the Spirit of God. Jews could never, until 1948, Jews never had the ability to say, our army is stronger than your army. For 2,000 years, from the time of the Maccabees or Bar Kokhba, the only thing that we could hope to do was to be smarter than them. And where do we get that smart? It's from learning, and from learning Torah. So that becomes a critical part of what we're all about. And then we go on and we say, may my heart be filled with your laws in order that I not despair. May I never forget your laws, for by them I am kept alive. That Torah is a source of life. Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim ba. Right? The Torah is a tree of life, right, that keeps us alive. Not only in a metaphorical sense, but the belief was in a literal sense that Torah, whether it's because God is pleased with us and will watch over us, or because the lessons that we learn from Torah will keep us alive. If you ignore them, you're going to get in trouble. Think about, for those of us who studied together, Kohelet and the idea of the wisdom literature. These were upper middle class, rich young men. And one of the teachings in the book of Proverbs and Kohelet and of wisdom literature is there's going to be a lot of things out there, boys, that are going to trip you up and may even kill you. Like, for instance, messing with the wife of your neighbor, right? Or hanging around with the wrong kind of woman, whether you're going to get an STD or whether the husband's going to come and kill you, right? That kind of bad behavior could lead to your death. And so therefore, on a positive note, the things that you can learn about doing the right thing morally, ethically, can literally keep you alive. May I never forget your laws, for by them I am kept alive. Blessed are you, God, who teaches me your laws. And then listen to how this paragraph ends. Amen, 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 Selah va'ed. And again, notice the threefold repetition of amen. It becomes almost a mystical chant. And just like, Kol Nidre 3 times, we said that first paragraph of Hadran 3 times. Amen, amen, amen. Amen, of course, from the Hebrew word emunah, meaning belief. I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. And repeating it is a way of further stating that. Then it says Selah. I got to tell you, the word Selah, which you probably know from Ashrei, that word, nobody really knows what the word Selah means. Most Jews, and especially traditional Jews, take it that the word Selah is an equivalent to Amen. It's another way of saying, it's a synonym for saying Amen. Yes, I agree with that. I believe it. Amen, Selah. But modern biblical scholars seem to think that Selah, especially because it comes in the Psalms, was a kind of on a piece of music paper, it was a note to the conductor and the orchestra and the choir. Here now comes a musical interlude, Selah. So in other words, it was a note to the conductor. We've been singing, and now Selah. We're going to stop for a moment. The orchestra is going to take us for several bars, and then we're going to come back to the song. That's what biblical scholars today think the word Selah is. So, Amen, 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 Selah is basically saying, yes, we believe all that we've just said. And then the word Va'ed, which means forever. Fourth paragraph of the Hadran. Listen to this. We are thankful before you, God, God of our ancestors, that you have made our portion from among those who sit in the house of study. You have not made our portion from among those who sit idle. This is actually a quote from the Talmud, from Masechet Brachot, page 28, in which we say, this is from the teacher Nechunya Bar Hakana. He used to say the following. God, thank you, God, you made my portion among those who sit in shul and not on the street corners. There's two kinds of people in the world, right? Most people are hanging out at the street corners and they're doing things which are not very worthwhile. And then there's the truly dedicated. They spend their time not on the street corner, they're in shul. They're davening, they're learning, they're studying. Okay? And then it goes on to say, for I rise early and they rise early. Me and the other guy, all of us are up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. But what do we do with that extra time? I rise early for words of Torah. I get up a little bit early so that I could study. They rise early for frivolous talk. Maybe I'm going to go to the gym, or maybe I'm going to watch TV, as opposed to the guy who gets up and studies. I labor and they labor. I labor and receive a reward. I get a reward, so says Rabbi Nechunya, for getting up early and studying Torah. And they labor, they're doing a lot of work, whether it's on that the treadmill or whatever, but they don't get the reward. I run, they run. We're all in a hurry. I run to the life of the future world. They run to the pit of destruction. Ultimately, the idea was that I'm running so that I can have a portion in heaven. They're running. What are they going to get? Right? Not so much. Okay, now we come to the final paragraph of the Hadran, of this prayer, of this little ceremony that takes place at the end. And this is actually something that's called Kaddish de'itchadeta. Let me explain. If I were to say to you, I would say to most Jews, what is the Kaddish? And they would say prayer for the dead. Well, most of us know that that's only one Kaddish. There's a lot of Kaddishes. There's the mourner's Kaddish, there's the Chatzi Kaddish, there's the full Kaddish or the reader's Kaddish. Then some of you might know there's the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the rabbi's Kaddish. But there's actually a fifth Kaddish, and it's called Kaddish de'itchadeta. In Hebrew we say Kaddish achar kevura. It's often called the burial Kaddish. I don't know if you're aware of this, but while everyone is familiar with the mourner's Kaddish, there's actually a different Kaddish that traditional Jews say at the cemetery as we're burying a person. Now, you may never have heard of this. Why not? Because the words are extremely difficult, not only to understand, but to even pronounce. They're in Aramaic. So if we're giving somebody who's not a traditional Jew, say this. Okay, I can give them the mourner's Kaddish. They've probably heard it 1,000 times in their life, and they can read the English word, the transliteration. But if I give them the burial Kaddish, no way they're going to make it. And they're going to feel even worse at that moment that they couldn't do what they're supposed to do. So generally, conservative, Reform Jews, we skip the burial Kaddish. We go right to the mourner's Kaddish at the cemetery. But this is what traditional Jews say at the burial, and it's also what Jews say when you finish a Masechet, when you finish learning together. We say this Kaddish. And the word de'itchadeta, from the word echad, which means one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. But in Aramaic, de'itchadeta. And these are the things that we are asking for, okay? We say, may God's great name be exalted and hallowed in a world in which, and listen to the 7 things we now ask for, either at graveside or at the end of having studied together. We're hoping for the time when God's name will be unified. God's name will be one. What does that mean? Well, there are many people believe in many gods. We're looking forward to the time when God will be one, truly accepted as the only God by everyone. But there's something deeper. Mystics believe that at the time of creation there was a cosmic accident and that God was split in two. And because that happened, God lost his power. And that's why there's evil in the world, because of this accident, and God is powerless. And what are the 2 parts of God? The Kudsha Brichu, the Holy One, blessed be He, the male aspect, the power, and the Shechinte, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the feminine. So God's masculine and feminine sides were ripped apart, and each one on its own is not sufficient to do things. We're looking forward to the time when God will be brought together with his missing part, and God will now become powerful, and that will enable true redemption to happen in the world. So that's number 1. What else are we looking forward to? when the dead will be revived. And again, this goes back to the second paragraph of the Amida, Mechayeh HaMeitim, the belief that Jews had that there would be a physical resurrection of the dead sometime in the future, which is why this prayer is recited at a grave, right? We're saying, dear God, we're looking forward to the moment when all Jews will be resurrected. And this dear person who we just buried will be back alive with us again. So that's the second thing we ask for. Third, and the city of Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Okay, today Jerusalem has been rebuilt, but for 2,000 years, most of Jewish history, Jerusalem was ruins. And this is the prayer that Jews asked for. Okay? Number 4, we're also asking, and God's sanctuary complete within it. In other words, not only Jerusalem, the city, be rebuilt, but the temple be rebuilt within Jerusalem. That's number 4. Number 5, and to uproot idolatry from the earth. We ask that ultimately that there isn't people worshiping things that they themselves have designed or created or made. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6, return the service of God to its place in heaven. The idea, we're looking forward to a time when all peoples, not just Jews, all peoples will pray to God. And God will be enthroned on his throne in heaven. And then number 7, and may the Holy One's sovereignty soon be accepted during our life and the life of all Israel. And let us say Amen. And then that's the first paragraph of either the burial Kaddish or the Hadran Kaddish. And then we continue as we would with any Kaddish. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Lo'omei Omaya. And then the next paragraph is the one that's recited in all Kaddishes. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmeid kudsha brechu liela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiram bi'alma v'yimru amen, which means, may God's name be glorified and celebrated, lauded, worshipped, exalted, honored, extolled, acclaimed. May God be praised beyond all songs and psalms, beyond all tributes that mortals could possibly utter, and let us say Amen. Now we come to another paragraph that's the essence of the Rabbanan Kaddish, the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Kaddish of the rabbis. And you've probably heard this. It comes early on in a service, so if you come late, you've always missed it. But here's how it goes. Al Yisrael, we now pray for Israel, meaning not the state or the place, but the people. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan, and for the Jews, for their teachers, v'al Talmidehon, and for their students, v'al kol Talmidehon, and for the students of their students, v'al kol man da'askim bioraita, and for every person who engages, who occupies himself, who busies himself with Torah. Diviatra hadein, in this place, right, in our synagogue, v'divechol atar v'atar, and in every other place where a Jew might study. Yehei lahon ulachon. May there be for them and for us shalama rabba. Shalom rab. Great peace. China, from the word chen, chana, same the name chana, meaning grace, grace from God. Vechista, from the word chesed, meaning kindness. Verachamim, rachamim, meaning mercy. V'chayin arichin, long life. Umezone reviche, Mizone from the same word as Birkat Hamazon, meaning food, sustenance. Reviche, not just a crust of bread and some water, but ample food and sustenance. Purkana, and salvation. Min kadam avuhon, before their father, Divi Shmaya, who is in heaven, V'ara, and who is also in earth, V'imru, Amen. And let us all say Amen. And then the last two lines of this Kaddish, the Kaddish de Idchadata, the burial Kaddish, or the Hadran Kaddish, you all know the last two lines. First one is in Aramaic. Yehei Shalama Rabbah. May there be great peace. Min Shemaya, coming from heaven. V'chayim tovim, and good life. Aleinu, for us. V'al kol Yisrael, and for all the Jewish people. V'imru Amen. And then the last line, and what's interesting is the last line pretty much repeats the previous line. But the previous line was in Aramaic. And the truth is, most Jews didn't understand. For the last 1,500 years, most Jews hardly understand Hebrew. Aramaic, forget about. So the fact that you have a line in Aramaic that people were reciting, and then they recite basically the same thing in Hebrew, tells us that, we think that everybody else except us, was literate and knew everything. The truth is, throughout much of Jewish history, literacy for most of the Jews was minimal. So what is the last line? Oseh shalom bimromav. May God, who made peace in heaven, which really is saying the same thing that we just said in Aramaic. Yehei shalom rabbah min shemaya. May there be great peace from heaven. But now we say in Hebrew, Oseh shalom bimromav. May he who made peace in the heavens. What does that mean, made peace? Think about the Big Bang. Explosion. You got planets, you got rocks, you got comets, meteorites, asteroids flying off. Some of them smash into things and wipe out dinosaurs and all life. Others collide and create incredible chaos. But somehow the cosmos seems to be orderly. Think of what we learned in school. You've got the sun and you've got the planets, each in their orbits, and they go, occasionally, rarely, there's an asteroid will hit the Earth. But more often than not, for millions and millions of years, things are orderly. And why? The belief was that because God wanted it to be so. Oseh shalom bimromav. God, who was able to bring the Big Bang, make all the planets, the stars, everything in their proper place. Hu ya'aseh shalom. If he could do that, which is a pretty good trick, then it's hardly a trick at all to make peace here on earth, right? V'al kol Yisrael, for us, for all the people Israel, v'imru, and we all say Amen. So that is the text of the Hadran. Right? And again, depending on your interpretation, either for everything that we have learned together in this room over the last 40 years, we're basically saying to the book and to each other, we're never going to forget what we've learned, and we hope that the book will never forget us and how much we tried to show it honor and to learn from it. So I thank you all.